Broger.
Thank you, Mr President. The Australian government was recently invited to observe the historic Nepali election held on the 19th of November 2013, and I was privileged to be invited to represent the government along with Senator Ursula Stevens, who represented the opposition. Australia was one of only 5 nations, including the UN, that were invited to join other international and local observers to provide an independent review of the electoral process and all matters connected with the conduct of the election. In an attempt to give some context to our participation and the election itself, a brief explanation of the governance of the Himalayan nation of Nepal is necessary. Nepal was a kingdom for over 2 centuries, ruled by absolute monarchs. In 1990, with the country slowly changing, the then King Birendra agreed to become a constitutional monarch. Later, civil unrest combined with competing interests of political parties led to a civil war that ravaged the country for over a decade. Following the tragic loss of lives of a reported 16,000 people, the government brokered an agreement with the Maoists that saw the abolition of the monarchy. An election was held in 2008 to elect a constituent assembly that was charged with the responsibility of drafting the country's constitution. This assembly was disbanded after 4 years, having failed to reach any agreement with the caretaker government taking over and calling for a new election. It was in this complex environment that we observed this second election. The threat of violent protests and bomb threats, combined with the palpable excitement of many Nepalis who embraced the opportunity to have a say in the direction of their country, ensured that the election was a very dynamic process. I flew to the district of Biratnagar to observe the election. In this district, we visited a cross-section of rural, urban and ethnic-based polling centres. With the Code of Conduct for the election of the Constituent Assembly member 2070-2013 in hand, we reviewed the set-up of polling centres, the opening of the centres, observed 10 different polling centres on election day, observed the process of closing the polling stations and the safeguard measures undertaken to ensure the integrity of the ballot papers, followed the delivery of the closed ballot boxes to the counting centre and returned the following day to witness the process of counting the votes. At the same time, we spoke with numerous electoral officials to ascertain their views about the process, the use of the identity card that was circulated in the last week immediately before the election. We spoke to volunteers and party officials along with a couple of candidates. I firstly wish to commend the Nepal Electoral Commission on the overall conduct of the election. It was a fair and freely conducted election with extensive processes to ensure that all of the 28 million citizens could register to vote and were encouraged to do so. Voting is voluntary. Notwithstanding the enormous task of establishing a streamlined process across the challenging geography of the country, with many remote areas, there was a consistent and honest attempt to conduct a democratic and fair election. In the lead-up to the election and on the day itself, there were real and hoax bomb threats that the 40,000-strong Nepali army and police forces dealt with. And in fact, a bomb was safely detonated by the army behind the first polling booth that I visited on the election day itself. It was handled capably and in no way deterred people from voting, and in fact I think gave many of them something to watch whilst they queued to vote. Australia has financially supported the Nepal Electoral Commission with a donation of $800,000, This has enabled $800 was pretty cheap, wasn't it? $800,000. This money enabled the establishment of an electoral training centre and assisted in the development of an electoral process. I wish to commend the strategic use of overseas development aid in fostering and strengthening the core values of freedom, liberty and democracy. And I have to say, the $800,000 was money very well invested. I wish to put on the record my thanks to our Ambassador, Glenn White, Ben Rees and Damien Dunn, along with the local staff who put together a terrific program for us, ensured our safety and well-being and provided expansive briefings so that we were well informed. Thanks also to Prem and Vikal, our competent and knowledgeable drivers who navigated us over some very challenging roads. The Embassy also took the opportunity to organise a tour of projects that have benefited from Australian aid money. These projects demonstrated how well targeted and managed projects can make a real difference to the lives of so many. I have to say in closing, Mr President, the Ambassador and his staff represent Australia in Nepal with distinction.
The Senate stands adjourned.